I believe in liberty just like you do. I'm a guy, I'm a fifth generation Oregon farmer, and I love my independence of living on the farm. I also like it when government leaves me alone, in a lot of ways. And not long ago, I got to meet a lady who actually is from my adopted hometown of Sublimity. Life is sublime in sublimity. A lady by the name of Diane Roark, who I found out had served many years in the professional staff for the Republicans in Congress, in the U.S. House of Representatives, on the Intelligence Committee. And as I began to talk with her, I began to realize, as she was telling me the story about how she had personal experience as a professional staffer in the issues related to NSA and other programs, many programs, some of which she still can't talk about to this day. But more importantly, the fact that this woman tried to blow the whistle on unconstitutional spying on Americans back in the early days of the Bush administration and was shut down by Republicans and Democrats. She retired. She came back to state in Oregon, close to Sublimity, only to have the FBI show up at her house about 4 years later, after her retirement, basically accusing her of being a whistleblower illegally under the Espionage Act, invaded her home, took her computers and records and lots of other things, of which they have still, not only have they not charged her with any crime, because she's not guilty of any, but they also have not returned all of her personal items. For that, she has been very brave to go out there. You may have seen the article on her in Willamette Week magazine. She's been out speaking, partially at my request, because she has a story that needs to be told, folks. When Greg said, put your phone put it away somewhere, he's serious. Because your phone can be activated at any time by our government without your knowledge and without a warrant. It can be used to spy on. It's wrong, it's immoral, it's unconstitutional, and this woman has taken enormous strides to stand up and tell this story. And we need to give her our attention. So would you please welcome Diane Roark. She has my watch, by the way, to make sure she's only going to speak for 20 minutes. And I just took 5 of it.
It's hard to squeeze this in, so I'm going to go pretty fast here. But I am here to tell you that our liberty, yours, mine, the entire country's, is at great risk. More than ever since the Civil War, I would say. Our republic is at risk because of this pervasive surveillance. It covers an unbelievable amount of your life, and there is no way to escape it, unfortunately. We are information that we would not give to our neighbors, perhaps even to our extended families. The government has all of that. They have an enormous amount of information on all of this. And this started with 9/11 and is justified by counterterrorism, but has been totally ineffective for counterterrorism. Why? Because there is so much data that they can't make any sense out of it. That's why. Further, the government has begun lying and misleading. They have deliberately kept this out of the courts as much as they could. It's now beginning to get there. They've lied to the Supreme Court twice. What would you call this? I would call it corruption. I would say this excessive power has already corrupted our republic and our government. And it's time that we take it back. So I'll just fill you in a little bit. Jeff gave you a lot on me. My education, I went to the Catholic University for a BA and an MA in international relations. Subsequently, I went to the University of Florida for most of the PhD work. And then I was employed by the federal government. Unfortunately, in international relations, there aren't a lot of other choices. And I was first at the Energy Department, the international section of the Energy Department, where I warned that the Europeans should not sign up for Soviet gas and looked at alternatives. Then I went to the Defense Department to the Pentagon. Subsequently, I went to the White House National Security Council staff, where I was in the intelligence section and worked primarily on counterintelligence and also on Soviet violations of the arms control treaties. After that, I went to the House Intelligence Committee, where I stayed for 17 years. In the last 5 of those years, I had the NSA account, which means that I supervised, I was, myself and the Democratic staffer on this were the primary people on the House side to make sure that NSA was doing things legally, that it was doing things effectively in a financially good manner, that they were not skipping things, they were not leaving us at risk, and I would make recommendations for changes to their budget every year. So that's basically my background. What happened was that only a couple of months before I retired in 2002, I found out about this secret program that I was not supposed to know about. And I got a number of sources eventually told me about it. And let me tell you, no matter what they say today, I was told it was not just metadata, it was content. It was dragnet content domestically. Furthermore, they had just then started, by July of 2002, they had started collecting other information, non-communications information on Americans and databasing it. So I'm just going to go down a very quick list of some of the things, this is not exhaustive, but some of the things of yours that they are collecting. Land phones, your cell phones, your emails, your texts, your Skype, your chats, your webcams, your social media postings, the FBI loves them. Postal mail, a huge program on the postal mails. Business records other than communications. The Patriot Act is so broadly worded that they can go to any business and get any record and put a gag order on the owner. So he can't tell you that your records have been seeded. Government records have been amassed, which was forbidden under the Privacy Act, but apparently there is a national security exception to that now. So all local and state and federal government records can be amalgamated in a federal database. That alone gives them an enormous amount of information about you, including gun licenses, of course. But if you think about it, what is there in this country that is a transaction of some sort that is not personal, that is not government or business? They have basically every transaction that you ever make. Remote activation, Jeff covered that. So if they become interested enough in you to make you a target, they can remotely activate your cell phone and turn it into a microphone so they can listen to what your meeting is about. They can locate your cell phone, and sometimes they do this as for everything in one cell phone area to try and narrow it down to who they're looking for, so they're collecting en masse at a tower. And another one that just came out just recently is facial recognition. Both the NSA and FBI are big into facial recognition now. They're collecting photos everywhere. the FBI hopes to have 52 million photos by the end of 2015. NSA is collecting them massively also through electronic communications. And that means emails, text, social media, video conference, driver's licenses, passports, visas, private webcam, videos including a large amount of sexual pornography. There is no subject and no means too intrusive for them. There is no content that is off limits. Their motto is collect it all, as shown in the Snowden documents. And what they told me before I left was, we're going to own the web. And they do. The Snowden documents have revealed it. They do own the web. As Glenn Greenwald, the primary reporter for the Snowden documents, said, there is no place to hide. There is basically almost nothing you can do except for not use electronics, use cash all the time, that might get you in trouble with the IRS, and basically live a life of 50 years ago, which would make you very inefficient. Now, the administration has argued not to worry. There are a lot of protections, and you're just fine unless you're doing something wrong. And that's not true at all. First of all, the effective protections were removed. One of the arguments I used when I went around and talked to a lot of people was, this is bad, this is unconstitutional, but at least restore the civil liberties protections that were there to begin with, that they deactivated. And I knew the technology because I had persuaded Congress to pay for it, but it was supposed to be directed against foreign intelligence. And they still have not been restored, and that was automated tracking so that nobody can pull your file off the servers and not have somebody know about it. And the other one was encryption of domestic identities until there is a warrant, an individual warrant in hand. Those were two extremely effective ways to protect privacy if necessary, and they still are not in place. So the primary user of much of this data, given that it's domestic surveillance, the primary user is the FBI, not NSA. And what we don't know, nobody ever focuses on, is that copies of these databases, of the NSA databases, go to both the FBI and the CIA. Has anybody, to your knowledge, ever asked about controls and accesses to those databases? No. There's not a peep about it. And that's where the trouble really is. Apparently, CIA can troll through them for any reason whatsoever, and the FBI assures us that everything is fine there. So what other checks and balances do we have? Congress. Congress is an abomination on this issue, an absolute abomination. The intelligence committees have been given a lead by the leadership, and the leadership is foursquare behind the administration on this, and they appoint the intelligence committee members. We need new leadership. And then they insist that the only legislation in the House or Senate will consider is legislation from the intelligence committees, which means nothing significant ever happens, including this last bill, which apparently raised more backdoor holes than it solved. What's the other? They also say, oh, you can depend on the courts, the FIS, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. They are watching this like a hawk. Well, the fact of the matter is, the FIS cannot deny a warrant. They have not been able to do so since 2008 in a legislation that was passed by Congress. So they cannot deny a warrant. They also give group warrants, not individual warrants, which means, for instance, let's take hypothetically a whole area code. If NSA wants to search an entire area code, they can do that. If the FIS approves of it, and they basically approve of it. They also, and most people don't know this, have jurisdiction over only a very small part of the collection that is being done. Why is that? Most of the collection is not done under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act or the Patriot Act, and it is done under executive order, under presidential wartime powers. So this order is called EO 12333, and they are taking a provision that used to appear innocuous and reinterpreting it as they have reinterpreted everything else to allow them to do basically anything they want. The FISC initially also, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, also initially said that they were unable to stop them because they did not have constitutional powers. They did not have the power to rule on a constitutionality of different things. Colleen Kolar-Kotelly was the head judge on that court, and she approved this and didn't tell the other judges for quite a number of years. I asked to see her, to tell her that there were privacy protections that could be put on it and that she should insist upon doing, and she refused to see me. So did Judge Rehnquist of the Supreme Court. So that's the judicial branch. There's no hope there either. Well, there is potentially, but it's going to be years down the road because the Supreme Court has said that they want it to go through all the lower court and appeals courts. And they're only looking at one small part of the program at a time. And this is a massive, massive program. These tactics, I hate to tell you, also trickle down to local law enforcement who deal with the FBI and who start doing some of the same things they have done, such as sneak and peek searches, which I was subjected to and which they have never admitted. These are supposedly illegal under the law. You have to be notified within 7 days normally, or unless you get an extension. They're apparently happening everywhere across the United States by local law enforcement as well as the FBI. And finally, the NSA data is now being used for criminal investigations, not just for counterterrorism, which was the original purpose. The original purpose of counterterrorism was widened to include other foreign intelligence targets as well. But what is not acknowledged, but was well documented in a Reuters article, is that they started giving tips to local law enforcement. And as usual, it starts with drug enforcement. So especially international drug couriers and so on. So this is another corruption because the courts themselves have become corrupted because they create a fake evidentiary trail, not admitting that they found this under the NSA surveillance program, because if they did, the judge would be able to rule on the constitutionality of it. So everything, in my view, is becoming corrupted. Another thing, is it effective against terrorism? Some people are willing to say the end justifies the means. That if it's cutting these terrorists down, that's fine. We'll take it. But it has been known since July of 2009 that it has been completely ineffective against domestic terrorism. That was the date on which the unclassified summary of a study by the 5 inspectors general of the intelligence community that was requested by Congress, but it apparently didn't read it. That was when it said specifically, we went and asked all the all-source analysts if any of this material had been critical to any counterterrorism case since it began in October of 2001. And they said no. And since then, Judge Dick Leon has said the same thing, and the president's own panel that he appointed said the same thing. There is one judge that went along with the government on everything, that disagreed, but it's clear it's not helping. And one of the reasons it's not helping is because they are drowning in their excessive data. They can't make sense of it. They can't automatically target and get targets to the analysts to look at. So it is completely ineffective. And just to give you a little more information on what they did to me, I argued with a lot of these people when I went to them, and I went to members, to Nancy Pelosi and to Porter Goss on my own committee. I wrote them numerous memos over a 3-month period and kept them up with what was happening with evolving events, and kept trying to persuade them to do something about it, because they were among the gang of 4 who had been briefed on it. Nothing was ever done. Of course, nothing has been done since then. When I found out about the program, shortly afterwards, I talked to a former NSA senior official, and who was trying to improve relations between Congress and the NSA, and came to see me. And I told him what I had heard, and I said, if this is true, I am going to fry them. And you know what happened? They fried me instead. And they fried 4 of my friends as well. What happened was, when I had talked to everybody, and I talked to a lot of people in the executive branch, David Addington, Cheney's lawyer who basically ran the program, refused to meet with me. But I talked to other people. I talked to General Hayden, who was heading the NSA at that time, twice about it. I talked to the Deputy Director of National Intelligence for Collection. Everybody would listen, but they wouldn't say much, except for General Hayden, who gave me some valuable information that made me even more concerned. And everyone I talked to, every single one, agreed that it was going to leak. And as I said, because it is so obviously illegal. It is so obviously contrary to all the training that intelligence people have had about what they can and cannot do. And they all agreed. Well, I was really amazed it didn't leak for 4 years, until December of '05. And at that time, I opened up the paper and I said, there was a headline across the front of it, and I said, wow, it finally came out. They immediately started an investigation with 20 FBI agents and 5 US prosecutors. So it was a big full court press, and the White House was determined that the culprit would be found, because very few people had been briefed into this program. So they were very hopeful that it could be, the leaker could be found this time. Finally, in August of '06, they called me, the House General Counsel called me and said the FBI would like to know if you would voluntarily cooperate with their leak investigation. And I said, yes, I will cooperate, but I will not tell them my sources. So finally, in February of 2007, I went for a little meeting with them. It turned into an interrogation. And it turns out I was one of their prime suspects, because I had so vocally opposed it. I thought at the end of our 3-hour talk that they were mollified. They were actually friendly at the end. And so we thought it was all over. My lawyer put it in her dead letter case. And then in late July of 2007, they raided me at 6 o'clock in the morning. They went through my entire house, every drawer, every closet, every mattress, everything, every book, and hauled away cartons and cartons of stuff, and my computer and my printer, everything they could find. However, I was never indicted. It turns out 4 of my friends were also raided, 3 of them at the same time that I was. And the 4th one, Tom Drake, was raided in November of that year. You may have seen some of them on TV. Bill Binney is the one who developed part of the system that they incorporated into this domestic surveillance, which they could not have done without it. And so he has been talking at a considerable amount, despite the fact that he has 4 amputations of his legs. And he is going around, making the rounds, going to Europe, doing everything he can to oppose this. So too is his sidekick, Kirk Wiebe. He's another one. And then Ed Loomis, who helped Bill develop the system, a larger system of which they used only one part. And finally, Tom Drake. Tom Drake was indicted. They were going to, my attorney was told that they were going to indict Tom and me, or one of us. And they were trying to get a conspiracy charge against all of us, but they finally dropped that. Anyway, in the end, they raided me. They refused to tell me the status of my case. In Tom's case, what happened was they dropped all 10 felony charges for 35 years in prison under the Espionage Act. The reason they used that is not because it was meant to be used against leakers or whistleblowers. It's because it has the most draconian sentences. So they used that, and 4 days before the trial, the public trial, they had already gone through hearings dealing with classified information. 4 days before the public trial, they dropped all charges. Why? Because they had set him up. It was fraudulent. With both him and me, they couldn't find anything that we had done that they could charge us with. So they made up the charges. In my case, they came in December of 2009, long, 2.5 years after my interview with them. And they called my attorney and asked me to plead guilty to felony perjury at the interview. And they read a quote to her. She called me and read it to me. And I said, well, I remember that. Exactly. That sounds like just about an exact quote. But it was a different subject. And of course, they had covered up the top and the bottom of their notes so that she couldn't see the subject. And they were hoping we would not remember. And with Tom, what they did when they raided him, they allegedly found 5 documents that were not marked as classified, took them to NSA, which obligingly, retroactively classified them. And then those were the main 5 charges against him, and then they built on those and said that he had obstructed justice by trying to delete some things from his computer, normal deletions. Anyway, that is the story. Tom is now very, very active also on the speaking circuit. So Tom Drake and Bill Binney, when you see them. There was also a Frontline piece on May 13th, which is still available online, that is 2 hours, but basically gives you the whole storyline, puts it in context for people who can't follow it themselves. So what is my message to you from my story? My message to you is that there is no one who is untouchable. I thought I was protected by legislative privilege, by separation of powers. I thought they would never dare to try and string up a congressional staffer who had been in charge of their budget and oversight. Well, it didn't bother them at all. It didn't bother them at all. All of us are vulnerable, especially those who are leading opinion leaders and dissidents on policy of any kind. You may have seen that DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, regards anti-abortionists as potential terrorists, former military as potential terrorists, gun owners as potential terrorists.
That covers the whole room.
I hope I'm on the list. I better be. If you're not on the list, you're not doing enough.
Indeed, I often wonder the absence of congressional opposition to this and other opposition and the failure of reporters to take this up. I'm wondering what they have on them, you know? I'm just wondering if in key times they don't pull something out.
And the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court
Yes,
justices,
and the Supreme Court.
like the one that approved Obamacare.
But I want you to know, when you click that I agree button online, you're giving away your privacy. It's commercial tracking is equally bad, but the big difference, what's the big difference? When people say, well, they all track you, who cares? You know, the government tracks you too. The government has enormous power and control over you. Enormous. They can string you up for something if they look far enough. There are so many regulations. They can stick the IRS on you, Jeff knows. They can do dirty tricks. They can do so much against you. And it's just, and at the very minimum, what you're going to find is that the only news you will hear eventually is what the government wants you to hear. That's what's going to happen. So in conclusion, I contend that government and business spying both is rampant and is totally out of control. And we need to focus on this at both the state and national levels. Terrorism is never going to conquer the United States. We have to get this in perspective. It will never bring us to our knees. But this will bring us to our knees. It will destroy our republic. It will destroy our liberty. Unless we act, it will only worsen. Because data mining and data collection is going to become ever more effective. They will not willingly give it up, as you have seen. In fact, there was a court case in which another gentleman was sent to jail for resisting NSA, partly. They tried to find something on him, and they might have framed him, too. But anyway, it was the head of Quest Communications. And he did go to jail. He is now out, and he's writing a book. But in his submission, he revealed he was not allowed to use the NSA defense at court. That's another thing. They pulled state secrets, so he could not use that as his defense. But he was approached 6 months before 9/11 to give NSA access to his telecommunications fiber optic lines. He consulted his general counsel, and the general counsel said it was unconstitutional, so he told them no. And he ended up in prison. This is a grassroots, bipartisan issue. There is no politician you can trust with this kind of power, not Republican or Democrat, as has been well shown. We need to get active on this. We need to make sure that every single person who is nominated for, or runs for national office must declare himself on this issue so the voters know where he stands. Finally, the last closing thought is that I want you to know that Glenn Greenwald, the primary reporter on the Snowden documents, has been saying for some time that he has saved the worst. By far the worst was yet to come. I was hoping that he found the extremely compartmented intelligence programs that revealed who they were targeting. And we were told by a fellow named Russell Tice that they were tracking and specifically all the elites, basically. You know, it was all three branches. It was Congress and congressional staff. It was judges, attorneys, international firms, It was their own executive branch people. I guess to see if they were towing the line, not leaking. People at the White House and the State Department, they're actually going after their own people. And by the way, Jim Risen, who broke the story originally, said when General Petraeus was found by his emails, by the way, by the emails database that the FBI had, this whole story came out. When General Petraeus was kicked out of the CIA as head of CIA because of the affair he was having, Jim Risen said to me, the surveillance state has started eating its own. This is an example of what can happen. And so for over 12 years now, this program has become embedded in concrete practically. It is going to be an enormous fight to get this out of here. But in the meantime, they have electronic files. They've lied and said they don't have files. It's automatically filed in the database under your telephone number, your computer IP address, your email address. It's all filed automatically when it comes in. For 12 years, they've been collecting files on you.
Okay, if we have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
It sounds like a sequel to The Bourne Identity or something.
Actually, you know what it's like? It's the, what was that, Tom? Oh, go on, I can't think of the name of the movie now.
Well, just today, a gentleman, a successful...
Minority Report.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like.
On the radio today, on Lars Larson's show, a successful businessman called up to report that his 6 banking accounts had all been shut down because one of them was an account he had money in for his gun collecting activity and stuff. The others were his multiple business accounts, his child college fund accounts and whatnot. And he was told by Bank of America, Umpqua Bank, that they were complying with a request from the Department of Justice to cease business with people who are engaging in transactions with guns and ammunition. And so when you brought that up here, I'm listening to you tonight and thinking, well, how would the banks know whose accounts to look at if the NSA and surveillance weren't telling them? And so would you suspect that it was the Department of Justice, NSA, informing Umpqua Bank that this person has this, will you help us or shut them down?
I don't know that it would be, this was federal government policy, you heard?
Yeah, they're doing it, it's a volunteer thing. They're asking them, all the major banks,
voluntary,
to
yeah.
voluntarily cease business with account holders who are involved in guns and ammunition transactions.
As I said, some of this is incredibly intrusive. Some of the things that have been mentioned under the business records provision other than communications include things like your credit rating, your credit transactions, your banking transactions. So, if that's the case, certainly they could be done.
Is there anybody out on the political landscape, as far as senators, House reps, that you can think of that are good people that are willing to really fight this thing?
Rand Paul has a big initiative now, what he calls the Fourth Amendment protection law. He is one. There have been a number, Ron Wyden, as you know, has been a leader in this. Mark Udall has often teamed up with him. There's another person.
Wyden's a phony. Buell went through some of Ron Wyden's stuff and exposed it as being phony.
Really?
Yeah.
Bugle.
Bugle.
Oh, Bugle. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
they actually printed the story in the Oregonian, actually. They printed
Yeah.
his op-ed on that.
Yeah. And our very own Marion County representative has usually followed Wyden's lead. However, this time he voted for the U.S. Freedom Act, which was a complete charade. And I wrote him a nasty gram. Okay.
Is Snowden a bad guy, like they have portrayed him as being?
No, he's not. There have been so many, defamations. Is Snowden a bad guy like they have portrayed him? There have been so many attacks on his character that just are not true. I mean, can't claim that I know Snowden, of course, but I have seen a lot of interviews of him, and I think he is very impressive. I think he sacrificed himself for this country, and I have to say, he had more courage than I did. I fought this on the inside, but I didn't reveal classified information. I quit when I had reached a dead end, and he just decided he was going to do this for the country and ruin his life. And I have to say, too, one of the things they keep saying is that he has basically defected to Russia. He gave them all access to this in China and everything. That's not true. First of all, it's the administration's own incompetence that stuck him in Russia. He got on a plane in Hong Kong to go to Ecuador through Moscow and Cuba. And after the plane was airborne, they revoked his passport. So when he got to Russia, he could not board another plane. And of course, Putin refused to hand him over. And then they're saying he deliberately defected to Russia. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. Another thing is they said that he definitely gave them all, if he didn't give it to them, they now have it because they aren't as good an intelligence agency as I think they are if they don't have all that information now. Well, in point of fact, before he met Greenwald and Laura Poitras in Hong Kong and turned over all of the information to them. He did have 4 computers, but they were blank. But he had put all of it on thumb drives before, and he gave it all to them before they left town and before he took the airplane. So there was no data for them to steal. He had also given it to some other people in case something happened to him because he was afraid of an assassination attempt. But he had no data on him personally. That's just 2 examples of the type of things they're trying to pull. Yes?
You've referred to the perpetrators as they. So who are they?
The original perpetrators were, well, let me start. What happened was that after 9/11, President Bush felt really badly that this had happened on his watch. The intelligence community, having missed the whole thing, started publishing every threat, that came across their desk, and everybody was afraid of another attack, imminently. They were afraid that we had been infiltrated by other foreign agents. And so George Tenet called Michael Hayden, the director of NSA, and asked him if there was anything he could put toward the fight, any additional thing. And every agency head was asked that. And he said, well, yeah, there's something I can do, but I would need authorization, I would need extra legal authority. And they said, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that, we'll take care of that. And then what happened, and the one that was driving this was Vice President Cheney and David Addington, his lawyer. David Addington has received very bad press on this as being kind of a bully also. But I have to tell you, I sat 6 feet away from him for years, and he was always very nice to me. But he refused to return my call. But anyway, so it really came out of Vice President Cheney's office, primarily. Hayden was asked to come down and brief the president. I'm sure in a very short briefing, the president okayed it, and it went from there. And then afterward, they just kept adding and adding and adding more things. And this has happened under Obama too. It has greatly, because of the 2008 FISA Amendments Act, gave them a lot more authority.
Based on your experience, and I understand what you're saying, your personal contact with it goes back to the Bush administration and necessarily a while. But the state of affairs as they are today, would you presume to share with us your opinion as to whether or not what we have today is a homegrown program that is maybe getting away a little bit, or if it is a result of our current administration has some questionable contacts, whether it has been infiltrated by foreign influence?
The question is whether this has been infiltrated by foreign influence or whether it just kind of got out of hand over the years. I would say they just kept adding to it. Both administrations have just kept adding to it. They started out with landlines. They then added cell phones. They then added non-communications. And it has grown dramatically, as I said, under Obama as well as under Bush. So there is plenty of blame to go around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diane is going to hang around here.